All right, joining me is Ambassador Rajiv Kumar Bhatia. Ambassador Bhatia is a former Indian ambassador to Mexico and Myanmar and former High Commissioner to South Africa and Kenya. Ambassador Bhatia, welcome to DD India News. Let me begin by
Thank you.
asking you, Ambassador Bhatia, for your initial thoughts or comments on how the COP28 has come along so far. Day one yesterday and day two today, the Leaders Summit especially. Your thoughts on the way it's panned out in the last day or so?
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here.
Welcome.
I go back to my time also as India's representative to the United Nations Environment Programme, a major special organization of the UN based in Kenya, where I worked for several years. I think it is true to say that issues relating to climate and environmental sustainability have now become a very major part of international diplomacy. I think without comprehending the various dimensions and implications of this subject, it is simply not possible to carry forward state-to-state relations with very many members of the international community. And I think India today has got tremendous experience and expertise, having presided over the G20 for the past 1 year. But let me first take you back to the domestic angle. And I think it can be said in all integrity that India's stance on climate change issues has become very assertive and very proactive. Mm-hmm. It is in a stance which is imbued by deep ideation. I think we have seen in the past two COPs where Prime Minister took part, major initiatives were announced.
Right.
And therefore, there is a built-up expectation that when he speaks at the conference, there would be some important new ideas as well. So this is an important conference. This is a major interaction at the level of the world leaders, and we should be looking forward to some tangible outcomes soon.
Indeed. Ambassador Bhatia, looking back at the events of day one, to begin with, some good news coming out of Dubai that there's been some progress on setting up of the loss and damage fund. How sanguine are you that the nitty-gritties, the details will be thrashed out going forward so that countries around the world, including the developing ones or the small island states in particular, can draw succor from the fact that they have enough resources at their disposal to tackle climate change?
Well, I think, we have to be optimistic. And it is an optimism which should be based on a dose of realism.
Absolutely.
I think this fund that was announced actually last year, it had raised a lot of hopes. Then somehow the governments allowed a whole year to pass before they came to the conclusion that operationalizing the fund is the next major stage they must reach even before the conference begins. So right on the day one, as you rightly said, the decision to operationalize the fund has been announced. I think we are all studying the significant implications of this. Certain figures have been announced, and I think details have to be worked out and studied as to how this fund can be put to use, especially for the more needy and more vulnerable countries.
Indeed.
But I would say it is a good, positive development, and I hope that the concerned governments will focus on its implementation soon.
Indeed. Just to go back to what the Prime Minister of India said in an interview to a local publication, Ambassador Bhatia, just to draw reference of our viewers to the operative part there, he says that we must ensure that development priorities of the global south are not compromised, number one. And number two, climate action must be based on equity, climate justice, shared obligations, and shared capacities. In that context, how do you view India's emphasis or focus specifically on the issue of climate financing?
I would say that, those of us watching India's climate diplomacy have every reason to be happy and satisfied over these 2 points that the Honorable Prime Minister has made in this interview. I think, first of all, when he now speaks, he not merely speaks as a popular Prime Minister of India, but he's also speaking as the voice, the representative, and a major leader of the Global South.
Indeed.
I think G20 has given that kind of majesty to the office of the Indian Prime Minister, that when he speaks on these subjects, he's seen as speaking not merely for India, but for the whole world of developing countries. On the second point, inclusivity and justice, I think this has been very much a signature element of India's domestic socio-economic policies. And this is now getting more and more translated or transformed into the external diplomacy as well. And I think this is receiving a very positive feedback, as we saw from the 2 Global South summits, or the Voice of the Global South summits India hosted in January and in November. So it is, I would say, in short, the logical culmination of what India has been doing, particularly in the year that is about to end in December.
And also, Ambassador Bhatia, since you referred to India emerging as the voice of the Global South, the credibility of India's voice also stems from the fact that India has had a stellar, impeccable track record on the issue of climate action. Take, for instance, the International Solar Alliance, the ISA. Then we have the CDRI, the International Biofuels Alliance now, and Mission Life as well. So looking at India's track record, you think it'll add more ballast, more credibility to the voice of India in COP28 in particular?
Yes, indeed. I think we can say that the world now recognizes that India just does not talk, it actually walks that talk. India has more than anything else, the elements that you mentioned are very important. But the most important thing is that in terms of securing the nationally determined contributions that India announced twice, first a few years back and then last year in terms of revised version, I think if we look at them closely and analyze them closely, we come to the conclusion that among the very many countries that are taking part in Dubai conference, India is one of the very few large economies which is on track to fulfill its goals and to achieve its objectives. I think this is something very significant, and that gives very special weight to the voice of the Indian Prime Minister. On top of that, as I mentioned about the ideation, the Solar Alliance, the climate resilient infrastructure, the LIFE initiative, and the wholesome success of G20, which came up with this idea of Green Development Pact. I think taken together, India has very strong credentials on the basis of which our Prime Minister will speak there.
Indeed. All right, we'll leave it at that. Ambassador Bhatia, thank you once again for joining us and sharing your thoughts with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.